what is the appropriate use of the city-owned Railroad Depot building on the railroad block in historic Folsom?
I'm going to pass on this one. I actually, as a newcomer, am not completely up to speed on a lot of the issues, and I'd like you to know that I'm trying my best to catch up. There's so much to learn and so much to think about that I haven't been up to speed on everything. So I apologize. I'm going to pass this on, and I'm sure the other members will have great answers for you. Thank you.
I am going to pass on this question.
Hey, so the architect is not going to pass on this one. That building, honestly, is not particularly well suited to what it's being used for right now in terms of space planning and its age and sort of the condition of the building itself. I think it would be great if funding were available to move the chamber to a different location, still down in the historic district, so that they could have a better facility, honestly, and so that depot building could become a more certain part of the historical experience down there on Sutter Street. It's a fantastic example of a building type that was built all across the country, and one by one they're being destroyed everywhere because they're just not suited to much of anything. Right now we're trying to figure out a way to, there's people working on trying to find a way to preserve some of our Chinese history in town. That building is well suited, honestly, with some minor modification and some improvements to a more historical presentation of material that we have here in town.
I have a feeling that was intended to be a multi-pronged question tonight, and that's based on the people that are sitting in the room and what I know of the history. Yes, the chamber, the building has been the home to the chamber for a long time. I think more so out of force of habit. The chamber would love to be somewhere else, ideally within the historic district. That building, to me, as many of you in the room know, I grew up in Boston, so grew up around 300-year-old buildings, and I think there's nothing finer than a 300-year-old building. That building's not quite that old, but honestly, the city has not had the funding that I think should have been spent on that building over time. There's been a lot of modifications. There's a lot of work that's going to be that will need to be done to that building to restore it to its former glory, separate from the money that the chamber has spent up to this point. I think that we're working with the chamber to try to find another location for them. Then the question will become, what will be done with that building? I personally would like to see that building be kept as a public building as opposed to sold to a private entity so that the public will continue to have access to it. What the council and the city's finances dictate may lead to a different solution. That's not my personal preference, and we'll see what ultimately happens at the end of the day. So I hope I've answered the objective of whatever the original objective of that question is.
First thing I'd like to do is thank Jay and Alex for being upfront and honest. I remember sitting in this chair back in '94 going, huh? And so I was doing the same thing you guys were. It's almost impossible to know everything, and obviously the three of us have a little more history. But specific to the question, I love history. What sold me on this city when my wife and I moved here was eating breakfast at Andy's Old Balcony Restaurant looking up and down Sutter Street, and then my wife and I went into the History Museum, bought my house that weekend in May of 1985. Been a member of the Historical Society since, spent a lot of money in having things preserved and this and that and the other thing. Specific to that building, yeah, I remember when I first got here going, who's Bud Davies, who's R.D. Davies? And that's what it was at the time, because that was the only facility. I love that building. I'd love to find money to fix that building. And I'd also like to keep it, one of the few buildings I'd like to keep as a government building. And I say government owned by the government because I'd like to have some control to be able to keep it as a public building, to do some railroad stuff to it, some history present. We don't have enough space to show all the history in this town. The museum is stocked to its gills. We need to participate a little bit more. It's one of the few buildings I'd like to say to still keep perhaps on the government roll and look at that. Again, that has to be vetted out by my teammates on the city council, and if I'm reelected, certainly my teammates on the city council. And most importantly, I want to hear what the public has to say. The sad thing is with the way government works is that if the public says, yeah, put it up for sale, we can't just pick one person. There's a bid process, and so if we do that, my opinion would be, let's invite the public to help us create the bid. So that way the bids come in with pure intention of what we'd like it to be, which would be a public building, hopefully displaying and keeping our history current.
Yeah, I think what you're hearing, the message is options. There are a lot of options. There's a lot of different directions we could move on this. It is owned by the city of Folsom. One thing to remember, there are a lot of historic buildings in this community that are not owned by the government that work very well. The commercial buildings down on Sutter Street, many of the beautiful homes right here outside our doors, are not owned by the city of Folsom, and they're well maintained. The owners are great stewards of the history in those buildings. So we don't want to get too captivated by government needs to own the building. At the same time, we have to make sure that we're good stewards of the building as an owner, which we are now, or that there's an appropriate handoff to an organization or a new owner that is going to take as good a care of that as we all expect. So, you know, without getting, my preference would be that we don't own it. City of Folsom. After that, I am open to anything, and I am even willing to spend some of our redevelopment money to make sure it is a good handoff. If it ends up going to a you know, very deserving organization that could use the space and show that they could take care of it, that would be a great handoff in my mind. But again, we got to be careful. That is an asset that we as taxpayers own, and we just want to make sure that the best value is gained, and sometimes that's historic. Our Folsom History Museum down on Sutter Street is not owned by the city of Folsom, so there are a lot of examples of very fully functional operations that the direct city ownership is not a requirement. So my appeal is for those who do have very strong opinions on this, please weigh into all of us up here. It's important that we hear your thoughts on this matter.